This invention changed the world, and it happened because someone messed up. In fact, some of the most essential, delightful, and downright strange things we use every single day weren't the product of a brilliant plan. They were happy accidents, born from mistakes, laziness, and pure, dumb luck. Let's start with a discovery that has saved countless lives. In 1928, a bacteriologist named Alexander Fleming returned to his lab after a vacation. He was notoriously untidy, and he found that one of his petri dishes, full of Staphylococcus bacteria, had been contaminated by a peculiar blue-green mold. But here's the strange part. Around that mold, the deadly bacteria had been completely wiped out. Fleming wasn't trying to find an antibiotic. He was just a messy scientist who stumbled upon a world-changing mold he called Penicillium notatum. It took over a decade for other scientists to purify it, but that contaminated dish gave us penicillin. From saving lives to heating leftovers. In 1945, an engineer named Percy Spencer was working for the Raytheon Corporation, testing a new vacuum tube called a magnetron for radar equipment. As he stood in front of the active device, he noticed something odd. The chocolate bar he had in his pocket had completely melted. Curious, he tried another experiment with popcorn kernels. They started popping all over the lab. The next day, he placed an egg near the tube, which cooked so fast it exploded in a colleague's face. Spencer hadn't set out to revolutionize the kitchen. He just had a sweet tooth and a powerful magnetron, and gave us the microwave oven. Now for the little square that organizes our lives. In 1968, a scientist at 3 meters named Dr. Spencer Silver was trying to create an incredibly strong adhesive for the aerospace industry. Instead, he failed spectacularly. He created the opposite. An incredibly weak low-tack glue that could be stuck and unstuck without leaving any residue. It was a solution without a problem, and for 5 years, 3M had no idea what to do with it. Then, a colleague named Art Fry, who sang in his church choir, got frustrated. The little scraps of paper he used to mark hymns in his book kept falling out. He remembered Silver's useless glue, applied it to some paper, and realized it was the perfect bookmark. That failed superglue became the Post-it note. Ever started your day with a bowl of crunchy flakes? You can thank a case of forgetfulness. In 1894, 2 brothers, John and Will Kellogg, were working at a sanatorium in Michigan, trying to create a healthier, digestible bread substitute for the patients. One day, they were boiling some wheat, but they got called away on an urgent matter and left the cooked wheat sitting out for over a day. When they returned, the wheat had gone stale. Instead of throwing it out, they decided to force it through rollers anyway, hoping for long sheets of dough. But instead of sheets, each stale wheat berry flattened into a single thin flake. They toasted those flakes, served them to the patients, and got an overwhelmingly positive response. That overcooked, forgotten wheat was the birth of corn flakes. Imagine enjoying a scoop of ice cream on a hot day, only for the vendor to tell you they're all out of bowls. That's exactly what happened at the 1904 St. Louis World's Fair. An ice cream vendor was so popular he couldn't keep up with demand and ran out of dishes. Next to his booth was another vendor, Ernest Hamwi, who was selling a crisp wafer-like Syrian pastry called a zalebia. Seeing his neighbor's predicament, Hamwi had an idea. He rolled one of his fresh, hot wafers into a cone shape, let it cool, and handed it to the ice cream vendor. It was the perfect, edible container. It wasn't a planned collaboration. It was just a moment of quick thinking that created the ice cream cone. Sometimes the best inventions come from a place of pure frustration. In 1853, at a resort in Saratoga Springs, New York, a chef named George Crumb had a particularly difficult customer. The diner, rumored to be railroad magnate Cornelius Vanderbilt, kept sending back his order of fried potatoes, complaining they were too thick and soggy. Exasperated, Crumb decided to teach the customer a lesson. He spitefully sliced the next batch of potatoes paper thin, fried them to a crisp in hot oil, and doused them in salt, thinking they'd be inedible. But the plan backfired. The customer absolutely loved them. That petty, angry gesture from a fed-up chef gave us the potato chip. In 1895, a German physicist named Wilhelm Röntgen was conducting experiments with a cathode ray tube in a darkened room. He was studying the path of electrons, but he noticed something he couldn't explain. A fluorescent screen coated with barium platinocyanide, which was sitting several feet away from his tube, started to glow. This was impossible, as the cardboard he'd used to cover the tube should have blocked any light. He realized he had discovered a new, unknown type of ray that could pass through solid objects. He called them X-rays, with the X standing for unknown. He wasn't looking for a way to see inside the human body. He was just a physicist who noticed a strange glow and revolutionized medicine forever, from medicine to manufacturing. In the early 1900s, a Belgian-American chemist named Leo Baekeland was on a quest to find a synthetic replacement for shellac, a natural resin secreted by lac bugs that was used for insulation. He was experimenting by combining formaldehyde and phenol, carefully controlling heat and pressure. His goal was a solvent. What he got was a hard moldable material that was an excellent electrical insulator and incredibly heat resistant. He had accidentally created the world's first fully synthetic plastic, which he called Bakelite. He was searching for a substitute, and instead, he kicked off the age of plastics. Before the convenience of a lighter, starting a fire was a chore. In 1826, an English pharmacist named John Walker was stirring a pot of chemicals, including antimony sulfide and potassium chlorate. After he was done, he noticed a dried lump of the paste had stuck to the end of his stirring stick. To get it off, he scraped the stick on the stone floor of his hearth. To his shock, it burst into flame. Walker wasn't trying to invent an easy way to make fire. He was just cleaning his tools and accidentally created the first friction match. Next, a sweet mistake. In 1930, Ruth Wakefield, the owner of the Toll House Inn in Massachusetts, was baking a batch of chocolate butter drop dew cookies. The recipe called for baker's chocolate, which melts and mixes evenly into the dough. But she had run out. In a pinch, she chopped up a semi-sweet chocolate bar from Nestle, assuming the small chunks would melt and spread throughout the cookie just the same. They didn't. Instead, the chunks held their shape, creating gooey pockets of chocolate in every bite. Her guests loved the new creation, and the chocolate chip cookie was born. She wasn't trying to invent a new classic. She just used the wrong ingredient. A non-stick pan is a kitchen staple, but it was discovered during a search for something much colder. In 1938, a chemist at DuPont named Roy Plunkett was working on developing a new refrigerant gas. He had stored a canister of tetrafluoroethylene gas on dry ice. When he and his assistant went to use it, they opened the valve, but nothing came out. The canister felt just as heavy though. Confused, they sawed it open. Inside, they found that the gas had polymerized into a strange, waxy white powder that was incredibly slippery and resistant to heat and corrosion. That failed refrigerant gas was polytetrafluoroethylene, better known by its brand name, Teflon. Some mistakes are just too good to throw away. In 1953, Dr. Harry Coover of Eastman Kodak was trying to create a clear plastic for precision gun sights. The acrylate resin formula he developed was a total failure for that purpose. It was incredibly sticky and bonded instantly to everything it touched. Frustrated, he shelved the formula. 9 years later, he and another researcher were testing acrylate polymers again, this time for heat-resistant jet canopies. A new lab member spread Coover's old failed formula between two lenses to test its optical properties, and they became permanently bonded together. It was in that moment Coover realized its true potential. His failed gun sight material was super glue. Let's talk about the bounce in your step. For years, Charles Goodyear was obsessed with making rubber more stable. Natural rubber melted in the heat and became brittle in the cold, making it useless for industrial applications. He spent a decade mixing it with everything he could think of, driving his family into poverty. In 1839, he was showing off his latest mixture of rubber and sulfur when, by his own account, he accidentally dropped a piece onto a hot stove. Instead of melting, the rubber charred like leather but remained flexible and waterproof. He hadn't found a precise formula. He just dropped his experiment on a hot surface and discovered vulcanized rubber. Here's another rubber-related blunder. During World War II, the United States faced a shortage of natural rubber, which was vital for tires and other military equipment. The government tasked a General Electric engineer named James Wright with creating a synthetic substitute. In 1943, while experimenting with boric acid and silicone oil, he created a gooey, bouncy, and utterly useless substance. It stretched more than rubber but couldn't hold a shape, and it was no good for tires. For years, the putty was just a novelty passed around by scientists. It wasn't until a toy store owner saw its potential that it was marketed. That failed synthetic rubber became silly putty. Sometimes a lack of hygiene can lead to a sweet breakthrough. In 1879, a chemist named Konstantin Fallberg was working in a lab at Johns Hopkins University, researching coal tar derivatives. After a long day, he went home for dinner and forgot to wash his hands. As he ate a bread roll, he noticed it tasted unusually sweet. He realized the sweetness must have come from the lab. He went back and began tasting every chemical on his workbench, a practice we definitely do not recommend, until he found the source, a compound called benzoic sulfamide. He had discovered a non-nutritive sweetener hundreds of times sweeter than sugar. He wasn't trying to invent a diet soda ingredient. He just forgot to wash his hands and discovered saccharin. Shatterproof windows owe their existence to a clumsy moment. In 1903, French chemist Édouard Benedictus was working in his lab when he knocked a glass flask off a high shelf. It fell to the floor, but to his astonishment, while it cracked all over, it didn't shatter into a million pieces. The glass shards held together. He remembered that the flask had recently held a solution of cellulose nitrate, a type of liquid plastic which had evaporated and left a thin, invisible film on the inside. A few weeks later, he read about people being injured by flying glass in car accidents and had his eureka moment. His dropped flask led to the invention of safety glass. Nature often has the best ideas. In 1941, a Swiss engineer named George de Mestral went for a walk in the woods with his dog. When he returned, he was annoyed to find both his pants and his dog's fur covered in burrs from a burdock plant. His engineering curiosity took over. He examined one of the burrs under a microscope and saw that it was covered in hundreds of tiny hooks that latched onto the loops in the fabric of his clothes and his dog's fur. He spent the next decade recreating this hook and loop system synthetically. That annoying walk in the woods gave us Velcro. Even a child's mistake can lead to an iconic treat. In 1905, an 11-year-old boy named Frank Epperson left a cup of powdered soda and water, with a wooden stirring stick still in it, on his back porch overnight. The temperature dropped, and when he woke up the next morning, he found his drink had frozen solid around the stick. He had created a frozen treat on a handle. He called it the Epsicle and started selling it around his neighborhood. Years later, as an adult, he patented his invention. That forgotten drink left out in the cold became the popsicle. Sometimes you find an answer by asking the wrong question. In the 1970s, an engineer at Canon was working on a new inkjet printer. He was trying to figure out the best way to get the ink from the cartridge to the paper. One day, he accidentally rested a hot soldering iron on the needle of an ink-filled syringe. A moment later, to his surprise, a tiny drop of ink shot out of the needle's tip. The heat had caused the liquid to expand and bubble out with force. He hadn't planned it, but he had just discovered the perfect mechanism. That hot soldering iron led to the thermal technology used in modern inkjet printing. Finally, an invention that keeps hearts beating. The first implantable pacemakers in the 1950s had a major flaw. Their batteries only lasted a few weeks, requiring frequent risky surgeries for replacement. An engineer named Wilson Greatbatch was trying to build a circuit to record heart sounds. He reached into a box for a resistor to complete the circuit, but accidentally pulled out the wrong one, a 1 mega-ohm resistor, instead of a 10,000 ohm one. When he plugged it in, the circuit didn't record sound. Instead, it began to pulse with a perfect electrical rhythm, mimicking a human heartbeat, and did so using very little power. He immediately recognized its potential. From a contaminated dish to a misplaced resistor, these stories prove that progress isn't always a straight line. Sometimes the most groundbreaking ideas aren't found in a perfect plan, but in some really lucky accidents. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and share this video with fellows. Your support helps us bring you more captivating content like this.